There is one unified field of consciousness that is completely non physical and non material. It is beyond time and space and therefore has no beginning or end. With that assertively grand observation, Dr. Tony Nader, the eminent neuroscientist, Transcendental Meditation pioneer, author, and successor to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, brings alive multifarious aspects of consciousness in a forthcoming book, Consciousness is All There Is. The 500 plus page book, published by Hay House, addresses lofty themes, making extensive scholarly references to leading scientists and philosophers of the last several centuries. Dr. Nader, who is a medical doctor trained at Harvard University and Massachusetts Institute of Technology with a Ph.D. in neuroscience, is also a widely respected Vedic scholar. He makes it a point to say that much of what he writes about has its origin in Vedanta, the backbone of Hindu philosophy about existence. In an observation reminiscent of the concept of Leela in Hinduism or divine play, he writes, consciousness is all there is, and everything that appears to exist is only and always a play of consciousness. Dr. Nader spoke to Mayankshire Reports from Germany. Welcome to Mayankshire Reports, Dr. Nader. It's a great pleasure to have you.
Great to be with you again, Mayank. It has been always wonderful to be on your show.
How nice of you to say. Thank you. My sense from reading your book, Consciousness is All There Is, that it's a pervasive, universal sort of energy field, which is not individualized, as it were. You write, and I quote, there is one unified field of consciousness that is completely non physical and non material. It is beyond time and space and therefore has no beginning or end, unquote. The overarching conclusion you have reached is that everything there is but a manifestation of that pervasive consciousness. That makes all of us like sort of vehicles of or vessels of this force. That would not be a very reassuring thought for a lot of people that we are just part of that all pervasive consciousness and not individualized. What do you think?
It depends on which angle you look at it. It can be most reassuring because if it is the all pervasive field of consciousness or all pervasive field of creation, of creativity, of being, then we are part of something enormous, and we are that something enormous. The only difference is that we don't know it, and we act from boundaries and limited perceptions. And that's why we see the other as different from us. So imagine you are the ocean and you're looking at the waves. And the waves think that they are different one from the other, which they are on the surface level. We cannot negate that. But if they know they are part of an ocean, then they will accept each other more because they are part of the same thing. In fact, they are one in their essence and their reality. And so that's a very reassuring aspect. And the question will be, from which side you look at things. If you look at it from the side of the wave, you are limited, and then you can get scared, you're tossed around and all of that. But if you dive into the ocean and know you are the ocean, then you are all powerful. All the waves are you.
I'm especially curious about how a Westerner might look at this idea of not being individualized. You're part of a huge collective. What's been your experience when you talk along these lines with some of your Western friends and colleagues?
Westerners, you call them Westerners, let's say those who look for objective reality, those who look for the objects and for, studying reality from an objective level. They have a good reason for that because, they thought that all these philosophies and all these even spiritual aspects of life, religious, etc., they clash with each other often in terms of their beliefs, in terms of their behavior with each other and all of that. So modern science evolved to see what works, what doesn't work, and what is real and what is not real. And so they used their senses and extended their senses through instruments. We have a microscope, which we cannot see with the eye, naked eye. We can start being able to see the small parts. We have telescopes that we cannot see with the eye, we can see with the telescope on the grander scale. And that was the reality that was discovered. And that reality is real on its own level.
Right.
Now, we operate within the scope of space and time. And you beautifully picked up a statement from the book, which is a key statement that actually says that reality, ultimate reality, is beyond space and time. It's like the ocean is beyond the limitations of the waves. So the waves can come and go. They appear to be interacting on a surface level, but the ocean is always there and is always supporting those waves. Now, to go back to the Western thinking, what is very interesting is there are two things that we should differentiate one from the other. There is the scientific method, which is perfect, it's beautiful. The scientific method of having controls, doing experiment, repeating the experiment, trying to study the laws that determine the behavior of objects, what they are, how they are. So the method is excellent. Scientific method is wonderful. And there is the scientific, what appears to be now more and more, dogma. What's the scientific dogma? The scientific dogma has been that everything is made out of some energy that then collapses into aspects that we call localized in time and space. And that's what we call the physical objects of reality. And all the other things, our consciousness, our feelings, our meaning of life, our big philosophical questions, they are byproduct of this evolution of matter into a physical structure, which we call our brain, and which, according to the scientific dogma, produces consciousness. And then we have consciousness as a byproduct. Now, this was actually very interesting to contemplate. And from a scientific perspective, it was hard to question it in a sense. You can question it from different philosophical perspectives. But when scientists themselves went deeper and deeper and deeper into matter and going into smaller than the smallest, they started to find more unified values of reality, which means things are not so different, so separate from each other on their most essential level. They are separate and different on the surface level, but if you go deeper and deeper to the tiniest parts and transcend that, go beyond that, all you find is fields, and the fields are not restricted in time and space, and they are more and more unified, which means ultimately scientists are looking for, or many theories propose, that there is a unified field. That's why I use the term unified field. There is a unified field, which is actually a mathematical field in which time and space are completely different than what we observe on the surface level. For examples of these is, for example, an object at that scale can be present or is present potentially at many, many different places at the same time. Now, when you talk about it and people don't know the physics, you think, oh, what is this kind of esoteric? No, it's not esoteric. This is really hard physical science. And this probability of existence has to be explained. Why does it happen like that? Another aspect is what we call entanglement,
Right.
where objects on that scale, usually particles, they interact with each other at distances that are unimaginable in terms of the speed of light and the limitations of how fast you can go, etc. So that one particle rotating in one direction that has been generated with another particle rotating in the other direction to maintain the equilibrium of spin, when one changes, the other changes at the same time. And this is not out of chance occurrence, and this is not because it is predetermined. And the scientists have done this over and over and over again and proven that these are actually one particle rather than two particles, because it's not possible to imagine that some information goes from one particle to the other faster than the speed of light, because this doesn't, violate certain laws of whatever, relativity, etc. I'm sure we don't want to go into that. And so all of these phenomena, which is called weirdness of quantum mechanics or weakness of quantum field, where particle can jump from one place against a wall. It's like a person sitting on one side of the wall and then suddenly appears on the other side of the wall. And for the particles to cross that energy barrier, it's not classical physics. So these are not the proof that consciousness is primary, but they show us that there is something primary which is not our physical, normal universe, that we see it in a classical way. And like this, there are many converging aspects, many converging findings, many converging explanations, which we call explanatory power, that allows us to put a number of things together and come to the conclusion, from my perspective, in a very scientific, mathematical way, that consciousness is actually primary, and that this field of unified value is actually a field of consciousness. So I use the term dogma for science. What is the dogma in science? The dogma is to believe that everything is physical and material, whereas there is nothing to prove it really on this fundamental level, except what we see through our senses. And now we know that our senses are limited in their abilities, even if we use telescopes and microscopes, etc. We cannot see the unified field or even understand that level of nature from the machinery of our nervous system as is.
But if we are all manifestations of this consciousness that you're talking about, shouldn't we be intuitively perceiving this fundamental reality without going into the physics or science of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we perceive it already. We perceive consciousness. So what is the most real thing for you or for me today or any day? It's that we are conscious when we are conscious. Because when I am not conscious, there is no reality. There is nothing. If I am not conscious, there's nothing that exists. And the things that we call existence or that exist are always changing. That's the field of the relative existence. An electron, a particle, anything, a mountain, a human being, everything is dynamically changes. Nothing is in the relative always the same. And if I was to give you a drug, or if you were in a dream state, you will imagine certain realities that during the waking state, you don't accept as being real. Therefore, we are creating our reality based on how our nervous system functions. What are the chemicals, the electrical things that happen? We create a certain reality, a certain perception of what reality should be. And all of that shows that basing our reality on physical aspects of human perception is not an assurance of anything to be absolutely definite and true and existing in a permanent way. One thing is real, and that is our consciousness. We are conscious human beings. And now we limit our consciousness to ourselves as humans, and we imagine that consciousness should only be the prerogative or the the quality that is to humans. And that is where the mistake comes. The mistake comes from the definition of consciousness as being human-like consciousness. What I'm explaining in the book is that consciousness is in a range from very narrow range to a very, very high level of possibilities of consciousness. And therefore, everything is an expression of consciousness. The animals are conscious, be it, albeit less than humans, it's fine. Maybe some in some level are more, we don't want to go there. But, plants have their own, and scientists are more and more discovering these amazing things that show how much consciousness is ubiquitous, which means all pervading. And so all of this, and plus other factors in terms of its explanatory power, which means are we free or not? What is freedom? What is determinism? What's good? What's bad? What's the purpose of life? And all of this can suddenly be explained on this paradigm that I present in the book, and that allows you to know why it's good to behave in a certain way, not in a other way, without having an imposition from some kind of law creating force that you cannot understand.
To digress a little bit, doctor, I've had two major surgeries in the last 4 years, one for my diverticulitis and one for my bypass. Both times I was under general anesthesia. Basically, I was gone for about 6 hours. Now, those 6 hours, that means 12 hours, did not exist in my life at all. So when you talk about reality coming alive when you're conscious, which is obviously the case, I'm curious to know from you, when I came back to my senses after my surgery, how is it that I was able to conjure up the world that I was already living in? Was I drawing on some existing memory? How did I figure out that I'm back to the same world?
It's a beautiful question. I want to divide it into like two parts. One part will be the answer to your direct question, and the other part is to say that when you were under anesthesia, you didn't lose consciousness completely. Your body was conscious. And the proof is that if they were pricking you or they're shaking you, your heart rate can go up, can go down, depending on your level of consciousness. So you can be not aware, but your body is aware. So what I would say to that is that you have slipped into a lower level of consciousness during anesthesia. Your consciousness didn't vanish. So maybe anesthesia gives us a sense of maybe the way a tree is conscious. I don't know. It responds to things, but is not aware of being a tree. It's not aware of being there. It's not living the moment. But your body definitely was reacting, was interacting, was changing during that time. And therefore, there was a level of consciousness which is much lower than your waking state of consciousness. Now, in your brain, there are, memories, there are states that are there, that when you play with them, they hide some aspect during a momentary time. And then when you bring it back to where it was before, you come back to the things that have been stored in the brain. So that's what we call recovery from damage, or in this case, intended reduction of certain activities in the brain that prevent you from experiencing on that level of consciousness. It's interesting because anesthesia is different from sleep, because when you sleep, you are also not conscious when you are in deep sleep, except if you are dreaming. You wake up in the morning and you feel, the night has passed and, I slept well, I didn't sleep well. Maybe I remember some dream, maybe I don't remember any dream. And you feel that like, okay, sleep and I wake up. I'm familiar with that state. When you go to anesthesia, depending on the kind of anesthesia, some anesthesia is like 6 hours has passed, but when you wake up, you think you just slept and woke up. Like You close the eyes and then open the eyes, and the sense of time is lost completely. And so this is a very interesting also experience of different ways of having consciousness of time, consciousness of memories. You know, you might come out of the anesthesia and your memory might be a little bit not so clear for a while. Depends on the person. Or some things, you know, maybe if it's an anesthesia that gives you a boost, you can come up, you know, feeling great and amazing. If it's an anesthesia that leaves some depressive feeling, you might feel not so good. So, of course, interacting with the physiology, which itself is a dynamic of consciousness, changes the experience of consciousness. And when it comes back to its original state, it recovers the memories.
I'm quoting you again from your book. You say consciousness is not a product of a nervous system, a brain, a body, or anything. It is the fundamental reality. That's an extraordinary observation. While I'm trying to understand, you also talk about consciousness being an energy field. Explain that a little bit to my viewers, why it's not a product of a nervous system.
Well, there is consciousness, and there is the experience of consciousness, and experience of different levels of consciousness. So consciousness as a primary field, we say, is like the ocean. And then there are the waves on the surface of the ocean. If you are floating on the wave and you can only see certain distance, just maybe a few meters, few feet, whatever, because your eyes are like that, they don't see more. And your imagination doesn't allow you to think of anything else, then you just see the wave and you are on that wave, and that's all you see. And you can't imagine even the ocean or what is there in the ocean. And therefore, you would say this is the whole reality is there. That's all that there is. Whereas the reality is actually the ocean and the waves, and what we experience is limited by our state of consciousness, by the development of our awareness, our state of consciousness. I usually take an analogy, make an analogy. Analogies help to understand this. This analogy is not absolutely perfect, but all analogies usually they fall apart at some level, but it gives an idea. You're sitting with a radio, suppose a radio, the old style radio where you have knobs and you turn the radio and you tune in and all of that. And now you tune in towards certain wavelengths and you hear the music. Well, do you say that the radio is creating the music? Yeah, maybe if you are 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years old, you would say that. But once you know how the radio works, you know, no, there are waves in the air. And this radio is a transducer, which means, in other words, it changes the electromagnetic wave into auditive waves because it has within it this system that takes the electricity and makes something, you know, vibrate. And this vibration makes the air vibrate. And now, instead of having the waves, you have an air vibration and you listen to the music. Now, do you say that the radio is creating the waves? It's not. Now, if you damage the radio, you can't hear the music. Or if you change the channel, you lose that particular music. You start listening to another music, or you start listening to noise.
Right.
So we are a system that has a certain qualities and certain abilities to see, to feel, to experience. You know, we don't see light which is beyond a certain wavelengths, like infrared or ultraviolet. We don't see. We see only from red to violet and the frequencies in between. We don't hear all the sounds that a dog maybe hears. And so we are experiencing certain aspects of reality, and our consciousness is interacting with those aspects depending on how our nervous system works. So what I'm proposing, and it's not my proposal, really, it's actually goes back to Vedantic proposal, the Advaita Vedanta, that actually says that consciousness is all there is, This has been taken again and again by different teachers, Vivekananda and then Maharishi Mahesh Yogi explaining all of this, that consciousness is all there is, consciousness is all there is. I've been with Maharishi for all these, many, many years. And this was all the discussion about the primacy of consciousness. So it's not my invention, the idea. There are Western philosophers who are great philosophers, Spinoza or Leibniz or Schopenhauer, Plato, the Platonic view of reality, all what we call idealists, which means they think that ideas come before physical appearance or surface appearance, have said that. So what I'm doing in this proposal, in this paradigm, is actually explaining how this can be true, how this can be happening. How is it also that something non-physical creates the physical or appears as physical, if you like, more accurately? And what is the consequences of this? Why is it important to know that? How does it influence my life? Can it make me more happy? Can it make me more able to understand others? Can it lead to technologies of consciousness, which is the important part also? And that is, there is a technology of consciousness, which includes meditation, yoga, and other techniques. And one of the supreme levels of this technology is transcendental meditation, which is the technique that allows us to dive from the surface of the ocean, or we are the wave, we are sitting on the wave, but it allows us to dive within and go deep within and experience ourselves to be the ocean. And what has been shown is that when you do that, when you experience that, you have more creativity, more peace, more harmony, more happiness. And on the social level, we have seen when a small number of people practice transcendental meditation together, or if it's a larger group, not even together, they can reduce conflict and war and difficulties in society. All of these are proofs that acting from the level of consciousness is a very practical aspect of life, because after all, anyway, when you declare a war, from where you declare the war? Not from your body, from your mind. The body only follows. So everything is actually going back to consciousness, and everything else follows consciousness.
Right. By your own admission, you're saying that whatever you're saying in your book is in the face of some evidence to the contrary. In fact, I'll quote you here. You say, abundant evidence makes it appear as if consciousness is a product of physiology, unquote. So how do you go from that to where you are now? It's quite a leap on the face of it.
Well, abundant evidence from a limited perspective. I wanted to say that those scientists who think and promote the idea that it's the nervous system that creates consciousness have had reason for that. And the main reason is, if you change the brain, you change the quality of consciousness. If you damage the brain, you lose consciousness. We have just talked about anesthesia and all of that. And so therefore, there is abundant evidence that allows the people to think that it's the brain that's creating consciousness. But I suddenly explain why it is not the case. There is abundant evidence by millions of people that the sun moves in the sky from east to west. And when the worldview was limited to the fact that the earth is the center of the universe, that dogma, that belief, made everyone right. There is abundant, you don't need more evidence. Wake up in the morning, the sun rises in the east and falls in the west. What do you want more? You see it, you experience it, and every day you ask your friend, do you see the same thing? Yeah, I see the same thing. So we all see the same thing? We all agree on the same thing? Yeah, we all agree on the same thing. Therefore, conclusion, the sun moves in the sky from east to west. That's a worldview that is based on a dogma and ignorance of reality, ignorance of the fact that the earth is round and it rotates around its axis, and it makes you believe that the sun goes up in the east and goes back in the west. And there are other examples like that in terms of maybe even space and time. The things that we feel are so absolutely rigid and set, space and time. What more do you want? How much space there is between you and me today? I know you are in Chicago, I don't know, 3,000 miles or something like that, or whatever. Don't quote me on that. Whatever is there. But if I was to fly to you at the speed of near speed of light, I'd be instantly there. Why? Because space collapses and time expands and all whatever this relativity kind of thing. And therefore, what? Space will look smaller? Yeah, it will. Yeah. If I travel at that speed and leave the Earth and come back, I find people here that are living thousands of years, maybe even later. And these calculations they've done over and over and over again. And so it's a question of worldview. And again, it highlights the fact that can we depend on just our nervous system as it is and our senses? Well, we can. That's important to realize. I'm not negating all the science, all the beautiful things that have been discovered and their importance in our daily living, etc. But when you come to questions about meaning of life, purpose in life, development of freedom or determinism, and the big philosophical questions about existence, about good and bad, and why this happens and why that happened, you are not able to answer those. And you need a paradigm, you need a system, a worldview that can put all of this together. And that is where now the biggest abundance of evidence tells us convincingly for me, and I hope the readers will be convinced when they read the book, that consciousness is primary and matter, physical matter, is an appearance within consciousness.
One striking observation that you make in the book is that an energy that is purely physical is the indifix that colors the thinking of most people in the world and is commonly taken to be the absolute truth. Now, it obviously that's the reality we live in right now. Right. And what the contention that you make in your book flies in the face of that long-held belief. How do you think the world would come to what you're saying from the intellectual standpoint?
We have been talking about this for 50 years, Maharishi for much longer, Vedic tradition much, much longer.
Right.
And it is the combination of findings of how much actually reality is created by our imagination, by our nervous system. It is findings from physics about the ultimate reality not being made out of atoms, but being made out of fields, and that those fields are beyond time and space, and all of that, what you just discussed about fields, we don't need to go back to that. And it is the explanation of questions that are hard to answer from the pure physicalist perspective. Why are we here? Is chance occurrence? What is evolution? Is it by design? Or is it by trial and error only? Or can we combine the two so that there is at the same time some kind of design, but it's also trial and error? And that's what I discuss also in the book. What is good, what is bad? Why do we feel happy at some circumstances and we feel not happy in other situations? What is the purpose of that? Where are we going? Why are we here? All of these questions have no answer from a physicalist point of view. Right. And the physicalist point of view brings us to what we discussed in our last talk together, which actually many people liked and actually congratulated you as much as me about how you handled it and how you asked the question. At least that's what they said to me.
Thank you.
That's what the physicalist world is leading us. If everything is physical, what's the big deal? If you can steal something and not get caught, why not? If you can kill somebody and not get caught, why not? Where does it take us? Okay, there is some categorical imperatives, and you get Kant and explaining moral law from where it comes. We don't want to go into that, but You can explain moral law also because it's a creation of God and God wanted it like that. And that's how it should be. And therefore, you cannot follow, you cannot do differently. But the world today wants explanations that are based on law, based on natural law, not based on somebody's mood, whatever, sorry to say, or God's mood, suddenly he is unhappy, or she is unhappy, and then destroys the whole thing, or doesn't care about some people, cares only about those people who are special people, or those other people who are special people. And who is special people, we don't know anymore. And that is maybe true, but it's making the young people run away from these beliefs. It could be true. I'm not discussing
Right, right,
the religious belief, but what I'm saying is, if we want to take it like that, it will be always subject to argument and discussion.
right.
Do we have a paradigm that combines natural law, which means laws that are strict and that have a reason to exist? I also go through this discussion in the book. What is the origin of law? Why there is law? Is it somebody's mood? Is it somebody's feelings? Or is it something that has to be there by evidence of things, by necessity, if you like, not by design or by a desire to do it in some way, but by necessity? And that is what is the beauty about the paradigm, that is presented. At least I like it, otherwise I wouldn't have written about it.
Right.
The beauty is that in the simplest possible way, it gives answers to these complicated questions and is able to accommodate even different belief systems that on the surface can appear contradictory, can appear conflicting. And yet, you can find a way to have a common denominator and have an explanation for all these phenomena. And that's what I call the explanatory power.
Right.
In science, when something explains many things from different angles, even if it's not proven directly, it shows that you are in the right direction of thinking.
Yeah. Just last two or three broad themes, Doctor. One is, of course, not directly related to what we are talking about, but I'm trying to understand from you as a scientist, how is it that in a narrow, specific sense, our realities always converge? For instance, if I'm looking at a mango tree sitting next to you and you're looking at it, we both perceive exactly the same thing. If
Because we are similar. See, we have the same nervous system, but does the bat who flies and doesn't see and sends radar waves perceive the same thing? Does the I don't know, the electromagnetic field feel the same thing? Does the dog see or hear the same thing that we hear? No, we are a species, and as a species, we have developed with a certain nervous system, and thus that nervous system give us our uh, experience of reality from a certain perspective. And I explained this also in the book, that there are different perspectives, and this has a reason why it should be there, why different perspectives have emerged from one field, why that field, which is a field of consciousness, suddenly manifests as different fields and different particles and different humans and different people. And we have a species. Our species has generally similar nervous system, although we have many differences on different levels. But we have eyes that see with a certain wavelength. We have ears that hear a certain wavelength. So this dynamics of consciousness that appears as our nervous system, which is able to, like a radio, experience certain wavelengths. And if you say, well, me and my friend and my neighbor and my person who is in the another part of the world are listening to exactly the same thing on the radio, and that means that thing is the ultimate reality. Well, you ask them which wavelengths are you tuning in. If they all have tuned to the same wavelengths and they have the same radio, they listen to the same thing.
right. One of the features of your book is the emphasis that you lay on the primacy of fields over particles. You highlight that particles are derivatives of these fields. Explain a little bit. I understand as somebody with background in physics, but not a lot of people might understand that.
Usually, the example of the ocean and the wave
Right.
is
Okay.
really a very simple way to do that. You know, you have a wave, and that is a field. That's what we call a field. You know, imagine it's an ocean which has no limitation in space
Right.
or time, and that ocean has waves, and these waves go up and down. Now, if you focus your attention on one of the waves, and as we said, you look only at the wave, then the wave looks like it's moving around. It's kind of limited in space, limited in time. At some time it's here, at some time it's there. And for you, this is what you call a particle, because that's how you experience it, as something localized in time and space. So particles are localized in time and space. And there are experiments that have shown that every particle is not just one wave in its fundamental level, it's actually many waves. So the idea is the particle is more like an electron, is not just like a billiard ball going around the center of something or the earth going around the sun. An electron is a cloud. It's really literally a cloud of possibilities. It's a wave, and it has many probabilities of being here, being here, being here, being here, being anywhere. There is always a probability to be anywhere, and sometimes less, sometimes more. And the science has shown that when you observe it and you put your attention on it, it just suddenly decides to be here.
Right.
And that's a big enigma also in science, one of the weirdness of quantum mechanics and science at that level. What happens at that time? Now, a bunch of scientists went to Copenhagen and they sat together and they thought about it for days and hours, and they came back with the interpretation that it's consciousness that collapses the possibility into one possibility, which means you're looking at all the waves of that electron, and suddenly you want to look closer, so you put your attention and you suddenly come very close, and you suddenly put your attention on one of those waves, and you say, well, this is it. My attention has collapsed the electron into this possibility, and that's it. And that's what you find in the laboratory. It's not like an imagination.
Right.
Now, to be complete in our analysis, there is another interpretation. That's the Copenhagen interpretation. The other interpretation of scientists who don't want to accept that there is consciousness, they have another imagination because they can't solve the problem. What happened? Why is it when I look at it, it collapses and it becomes right here as a particle? So they say, no, it doesn't collapse and consciousness doesn't do anything. What happens is that you put your attention on this particular waves, and all the other waves are in other universes. In endless universes, these particles are appearing. Here it appears here, but they say they call it decoherence for those who are interested, which means it disconnects from the wave, and now all the particles, everyone appears in a different universe. What is very interesting is that although this is a possibility, I'm not neglecting that, and many physicists believe this is how it works. What is very interesting is I'm proposing something very simple, that consciousness is primary. It's not a big deal. Everybody has consciousness. Everything has consciousness. And you find this very complicated. I go back to your questions about how will the Western world see it and all that. They find this complicated, but they're happy to say that every time you move your hand like this, there is somebody in another universe that's moving their hand in the other way, or in multiple universes where the hand is moving in all kinds of directions. Where is the energy coming from? What is the idea of it? Why does it happen like that? If it's all energy, when it's infinite energy and energy that doesn't stop from being, where does it come from? This imagination.
Right.
So I find my explanation much more plausible.
Right. Last two things. You have used a memorable phrase. It is a field of abstract silence. That jumped out at me when I was reading it. I'm intrigued by it. Tell me a little more about what you mean by a field of abstract silence.
Abstract in the sense that it's not localized in space and time, that it can be conceived mentally, but does not necessarily open itself to physical examination through the senses.
I see.
You will see its effects. You can study how it influences things. You can see what it does, but itself is not something you can suddenly say, now I put it in a cyclotron or in a big particle accelerator, and I will find that particle, which is consciousness. And if I don't find it, therefore it doesn't exist. So I say from the beginning, don't try to find it. It is an abstract field, which means it's not open to the senses.
I see.
Directly, although there are no senses without it,
Right.
it's the light that lights the room, and you see the objects in the room. If you don't see the source of light, consciousness is what lights the room.
There is the concept of Leela in Hinduism, which is essentially about a playful universe that is illusory. A 15th century poet philosopher called Narsi Mehta from my state of Gujarat, in fact, had written about how universe unfolds for itself for its own edification and joy. Uh, while reading the book, it struck me that it's very similar to what these people had been saying for centuries and even millennia. Uh, how did you personally approach something that has existed for so long as a wisdom in India?
Well, as I said, I didn't invent that idea.
Sure.
And Maharishi, for example, who is my teacher from the Indian tradition, from the Vedic tradition, has explained this and commented on it. And based on his explanation, his angles, I put it all together in this book in a way that I hope that the modern thinker, the modern scientist, the philosophers of today can feel that it's correct, can feel it's not strange, and give the reasons why it explains things and how it explains things. And so what you explained is very beautiful. I'm not familiar with the particular poet or philosopher, but it's absolutely like that. And the concept of Leela is not just play in the sense, because Leela means playing or to
Right.
play. But it's not a play in the sense that it is not serious or it is not, real. It's just,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's just because it is light-hearted in a sense,
Indeed.
It is a joy. That's what is meant. It's not, and it's the expansion of happiness. When you ask Maharishi what is the purpose of life, he says the purpose of life is the expansion of happiness.
Right.
And the question is, how does happiness emerge? And why does happiness is needed to be expanding? Isn't it already a full ocean? Yes, it's a full ocean. And again, I explained in the book why this ocean suddenly manifests as limited values.
Right.
And the short answer to this, whose explanation can be described in a longer way, is that this is a field of consciousness whose nature is to be conscious, and whose nature is to be conscious in all possible ways. When it is the ocean alone, settled, silent ocean, it is conscious from this unbounded level.
Right.
But being conscious from this unbounded level, it has an imagination, if you like. It can imagine things. Like us humans, you want to create a fiction book or fictitious book, you can imagine any character. And even us as humans, we are such very fertile imagination. We
Right.
can imagine anything, gods and deities. We can imagine Greek gods, Hindu gods. We can imagine unicorns. We can imagine living for 1,000 years or living for eternity. We can imagine becoming younger. Why not? We can imagine. So even us, we can imagine with such a fertile way.
Right.
that consciousness, which is unbounded, can imagine in an infinite number of ways. Can
Right.
imagine you, can imagine me, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Now, it
Yeah.
knows all of this from an infinite perspective, but it doesn't know it from a limited perspective.
I
So
see.
the Leela, the play, is that it hides itself in those limited perspectives and see them evolve from very limited perspective to higher and higher and higher perspective. And that is how the joy comes. That's how the expansion of happiness comes. So the manifestation is actually about the dynamics of evolution rather than about individual
I see.
limited perspective.
I see.
So when do you feel happy? You feel happy when you grow. Really, it's not when you have more. Because to have more is good because it makes you feel you are more.
Right.
But the essence and the real goal is to grow in consciousness and expand your awareness. And you might do it in different ways. And that's how expansion of happiness happens.
Yeah. To conclude, Dr. Nader, you have referred to Steven Weinberg, the Nobel Prize winning physicist, along with Sheldon Glashow and Abdus Salam, to say that everything we observe on the surface, manifestation seems to come from one unified field. We have already talked at length about that. My question is somewhat different. Weinberg also said of the universe, and this is a very famous quote, the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless. You talked about purpose and meaning. If Weinberg is saying that on the one hand and saying this on the other, how do you come down on that?
He didn't connect the two dots.
No, he didn't. Yeah.
So he didn't, and I hope that my book actually helps to connect. See,
Okay.
it's the thing is, you say that the world looks more like a thought than than a reality, a physical reality. That there is something beyond the limits of what we understand, and he sees that there is a sense of also uncertainty with the Schrödinger, equation and all of that, and Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
Right.
And when they saw that, and they saw the weirdness, and they saw that, in fact, there is all these potentialities, then it looks like it's a chaos. It could be like a chaos, or could be unpredictable in a sense, and therefore pointless. And
Right.
that is one aspect that I address in the book also, the question about chance occurrence versus orderliness. This is another big question.
Right.
And that leads to the answer about determinism and freedom. Can we have both? Because the laws of nature are deterministic,
Right.
but there is a minimum level of uncertainty and a minimum level of potentiality that allows us to have freedom to choose within constraints of the laws of nature.
Right.
So that also marries these two possibilities. There is freedom, but there is law also, and there is order. One can say, how can this be possible? Well, that's also I like the reader to come
Indeed.
to the book, and if you have time, I'm happy to comment.
No, this is fascinating. I can go on for hours with you. I mean, you know it. You have time constraints as well. But I'm really grateful that you reached out and Adrian reached out.